Anecdotes for success. Level up with truth, meaning, trade-offs, perspective.
Matt, tonight we have Bob Michaels on. I'm excited to have Bob share his story. He's an awesome contributor to sports and radio and just being a good citizen in the community. So Bob, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. And it's been a while since I've seen Matt. I catch Paul occasionally out for his morning walk or run and chatting on his phone at the same time. Talk about a guy that multitasks. You gotta be the poster boy for that, Paul.
That's probably a disaster waiting to happen. Don't tell my wife that. So Bob, yeah, like I was saying earlier, go back as far as you want. We always like to start off with our guests just giving us a little background about themselves.
Well, I think it probably began when I was about 4 or 5. We always had a radio playing in the house, and I was accustomed to listening to music. It was interesting too. I can remember at night at home, supposedly having gone to bed and sleeping and all that, but a radio playing in the background, and there were music programs. I would later find out how they did it, but at the time I was amazed that you could hear music from Hawaii being played by these big band orchestras, which my folks were very much into and everything like that. Fast forward, I think it was probably I was in Cub Scouts. We had our monthly pack meetings, and we put a skit on, and it came about when we visited a local radio station in South Corning where I grew up, and we picked up some what we called news copy that came over a teletype machine, which we used for part of the skit. And I can remember sitting on the stage as the newsman reading the script and all that from the news copy. And I kept going and going and going, and I got prodded by my den mother. Okay, that's enough. You read enough and everything. So I think I probably got hooked on it by that. And then, in high school, I had a friend who was in, I think, and I'm not sure what the terminology now is in school. It may be tech club or whatever, but back in the day, it was audio video club. And a friend told me about going over to a local radio station in Corning as part of the AV group and having a weekly 10 or 15-minute show. And I thought, that's pretty intriguing. So I think essentially that's where it bit. I went off to school, studied, the major intent was to become an educator. And I'm thinking in retrospect, also had thoughts of maybe becoming a coach of some nature, because I always loved sports. But my guidance counselor in high school said, if you do the math, I'm going to hold my fingers up, there'll be this many people looking for that many jobs and able to secure it. So I thought, well, let's try something different. So I majored in journalism with a minor in broadcast. Got my first real job, if you will, in radio. And there are a lot of people who intertwined as far as my career is concerned. If we look back to 2010, Tim Shattuck and I started RLM Sports, but it all began when I was in college, and I got a part-time job thanks to his dad, Bob Shattuck, who was a part owner of a radio station in South Corning. And while I wasn't on the air per se, I was at the control boards, running music and doing things like that. So that was my first essentially real job in radio. And then I got a part-time job working in Bath as the afternoon guy, which they liked the work that I did, and got moved to the morning shift, which was challenging, especially for a former teenager guy out of college and everything that loved to sleep in. And then found out the realization was that you'd have to wake up early in the morning to do that sort of thing. But now looking back on it, some habits are hard to break. Even though I'm not doing a morning show on terrestrial radio, I still wake up at 4:30 every morning.
So Bob, to give people some perspective, how many years have you been doing this? Been in the industry? Let me put it that way.
Well, let's see. My first full-time job was back in 1970.
Okay.
So do the math. I was a young guy, learning the trade and everything like that. So I've been very fortunate. I've told people that I've never looked upon that job as a broadcaster as going to work. I've loved every single day that I've been a part of it. When my wife passed away at Christmas time in 2009, Tim Shattuck, who was a childhood friend, and this is interesting, his wife and my wife were best friends, but I never met my wife until she came home the last day of college. And they ultimately, we all became kind of a foursome as far as being friends and everything like that. And when she passed away, I was working at WLM in Elmira as a sports director. The owner decided that sports was not a major player as far as their programming was concerned. So Tim and I got together, and it's amazing. You hear about all these crazy stories. We were dining at a local chicken place in town. I explained to him what was going on, that they were going to shut down the local sports bureau at the radio station. And I said, but I have some ideas. So we took, honest to goodness, guys, we took a table napkin, turned it over, and put down the format of what we would like to do. And it was at that time in late February, early March of 2010 that the concept for RLM Sports came to be. And word on the street was, well, you guys are going to have a rough time. Who's going to listen to internet radio, sportscasts, and all of that? We'll give you 3 months. Guys, we're going on 13 years now.
Well, Bob, why do you think that is? Why do you think you're going on 13 years?
Because I built up a following. I had a lot of loyal advertisers who were with me from my early radio days, and especially with me doing sports and everything. And I had the good fortune of being able to call a multitude of different sports. Didn't just specialize. Some guys that get into radio or get into broadcasting, and all they want to do is one thing. But I wanted to be able to tell the stories of all these athletes.
Well, that's I'm glad you said that, because so was that by design, because you thought, well, this will make me more marketable, or was it just because I enjoy this?
Pure enjoyment.
Pure enjoyment, and that was that difficult, because calling baseball is different from calling hockey, from football, from basketball, et cetera, et cetera. Did you find that trying to be a jack of all trades, if you will, if it wasn't difficult?
Not really. I tell people from time to time, close associates, I don't know that I could handle a 162 game schedule like baseball mandates. I have seasonal games. We start with high school football. That runs by late August or early September until November, if you're fortunate enough to have a team that is able to go to state playoffs. So, and then you transition into basketball. Basketball is probably the longest sport, because it begins in November and runs until like middle March. And on the same time, I call hockey at Elmira College, men and women's hockey. That starts late October. And if you're fortunate enough to have teams that are strong, and they are at Elmira College, we run till middle of March. Right after that, it's lacrosse, it's baseball, it's softball. So, I'm very fortunate. I always say, I've never had a day, as I told you earlier, that I went to work and didn't look at it as being work. We go to stadiums. I have essentially the best seat in the house. You know, if I was calling an Elmira Pioneer baseball game, I'd be sitting up top and having the grand view of, you know, of the stadium there, of Dunfield. And so having the best seat in the house, calling sports, which I love. And you know what? Sometimes they feed us hot dogs, you know, hot chocolate,
Yeah, I'm
things
aware.
like that. So I mean, it's winner, winner, chicken dinner, right?
Yeah, no question about it.
Yeah,
Paul, looks like
because
you had something to ask.
yeah, no, I mean, you've hit it twice, and that's what I love, that you don't feel like you go to work. That's the whole point. Like, you just keep pursuing athletic events because why not, right?
Well, you know, Paul, if I had become an educator, as I said, I would have gravitated toward calling sports if it was in the mix. And I know a lot of my friends who are coaches and teachers at the same time as you have an opportunity to, what I like most is to be able to tell the story of all the students, of all the athletes, and whether it begins in high school and they opt to stay regionally, I get a chance to once again interact with them. At Elmira College, for example, I do a lot of one-on-one interviews with the athletes, whether it's before, and most of the time it's after game. And you know, the sport being cyclical, you get a chance to interact with these young men, these young women for about 4 years. But in addition to that, I get a chance to meet some great people, their parents, their grandparents, and they come up to me and I get texts all the time, you know, from the moms and dads and grandfathers who follow their grandsons, their granddaughters. And we get a chance to share. And as we're talking, I'm thinking about something recently. I stopped at a local eatery, and this was maybe about 2 weeks ago. And there were, I was talking with my friend who is one of the proprietors of this place. I was picking up some food, and he says, you know, the women from Elmira College hockey are here. I said, oh yeah? He said, yeah, they came in for a dinner. So on my way out, I start to walk out, and it's, hey, Bob, how are you? You know, so I had to go over and say hello to them. And I said, you know, it's really kind of you all just to remember me. And they've been very kind because they send me texts all the time during the season. And I think I'm building relationships that have gone forever, because when we do, I'm picking on hockey, but it comes to mind immediately. A lot of the alums will come back during alumni weekend, and we'll mic them up and we'll put them on the air in between periods, and they talk about what they're doing and reflect fondly on their days playing hockey at EC. And the same thing applies to when I'm doing baseball and softball at Mansfield University, all those former athletes. And there's a young man who played baseball for Mansfield the last couple of years who was from Israel. And he actually made the Olympic baseball team for his home country. And got a chance to get to know him, talk with him. And that'll be a friendship I think will last forever. So, you know, and I get a chance to, you know, while my boys were growing up and playing sports and everything, I had the good fortune of, you know, sometimes kind of tailoring games that I would call, you know, because their high schools were playing games and so forth. But I said, one of the nice things is that I get a chance to, if I'm not following my own kids, I'm following other people's children.
You summed it up. I mean, just the relationships built, the conversations you can have for a lifetime, the value you provide. What's going on right now is priceless. I know Matt's wheels are turning too.
Well, you know, before we jump to Matt, I want to say I had a lot of great pleasure following your two girls playing at Horseheads High School, whether it was softball or basketball. And I mean, talk about competitive nature. and to see what they were able to do going off to the college. And, you know, just for some kids who may not have gotten scholarship per se, and I say that in parentheses, but you have some athletes, Paul, who are walk-ons, and you know personally what Allie was able to achieve, and Jenna as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So Bob, I got to ask you, you know, you've been doing this 52 years, if my math is correct.
Oh, stop.
I didn't want to say that. I did not want to say that.
That's incredible. It's incredible. It obviously, you know, it's funny because you've talked a couple times how it hasn't felt like work for you. And one of the things that I think about often is the number of people who say to me how much they love their job, but then out of the other side of their mouth, they're talking about how they can't wait to retire and they have all the retirement plans. And I always go, those don't equal that well for me. But in any case, you're a guy who's been doing it and continues to do it. Are there any athletes, either from athletic accomplishments or just who they were as people or anything that just stand out to you over this, you know, several decades that you know come to mind that just stood out for one reason or another that you look back on, you know, if favorably? And I'm sure there's got to be a lot, I'm sure, but anybody come to mind or any situations come to mind that are just unique?
Well, I'll tell you, this is most recent, but there's a young man who played sports in Corning. I got a chance to first meet him, and just sharing with you some of the things that I do behind the scenes. I don't just show up in games and plug in my microphone and get ready to go. I do a lot of background research. I go out to the schools ahead of the season beginning, doing one-on-one interviews and take pictures. You know, one thing that I have to say, Tim Shattuck and I made a point to emphasize, we didn't want to be thought of as an audio only play-by-play unit or an audio video group. I take a lot of photos, and we use social media to build, you know, a following, but it goes back to radio days when you were selling advertising. It was what we called point of mind awareness. And if you're not out there promoting your product, and your competitor, whoever that might be, is doing so, who's the public going to think of first? That plan B or not me? Right. So that's why we do it. But going back to your question, one young man who comes to mind is Ben Williger. Ben was a basketball and his brother too, but Ben most recently is playing for East Carolina University. When he was recruited from high school ball, he initially signed with the University of Maine. He left Maine and went to Barry University in Miami. And COVID hits and all of that, and a lot of these athletes get an extra year. And he ends up at East Carolina University, a team that was very competitive this year. And I followed Matt, or I don't know, I'm looking at you, Matt, so that's why. But I followed Ben after high school ball. He played some collegiate leagues out of Geneva. And, you know, there were times when I didn't have anything going on for the summer, so it's only a short drive to Geneva. So I would drive and watch him play. There was another young man who played for Corning Hawks, but he ended up playing in Jamestown in the collegiate league there. So one night I go to Geneva and I find out that both young men are playing against one another and all that. So I got a chance to meet up with them after the game. And I got to know Ben's parents as well as his other young man's parents on a fairly good basis. And when Ben was playing at East Carolina this year, I reached out to him and I congratulated him because they had just made I think they won regionals and they were going off to the super regionals. And he's been the type of guy who responds to, any type of praise. And he'd always thank me. And he's one of the most polite athletes I've met. It was always, "Thank you, Mr. Michaels." I said, "Call me Bob." I can't call you Bob. And I found out, Matt, I think, and Paul, maybe you can share something like that. Is that a teacher thing when you run into educators and you say, "Hey, Paul, how you doing?" Or, "Hi, Matt." "Fine, Mr. Michaels."
Yeah, I mean, to spin off that real quick, I just had that happen twice this week. I mean, I just turned 50. I've been teaching. I just finished my 25th year, and I have kids that are literally in their 40s now, still calling me Mr. Richmond. I'm like, "No, you can call me Paul," and they just can't do it. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's the ultimate form of respect, even though you're telling them we're here now, and they see you here, and but go on. Yeah. So yeah, it's a universal
I'm thinking it's a mom and dad thing, which the
yes,
athletes share with me, because they say, "Well, Mom and Dad always told me to respect my elders." So I've done a little talking. I need to take a little liquid refreshment.
Of course.
So funny story. Ben's father and I, Tom, in the summertime, we teach first tee golf camps together.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've been doing that a couple of years now. So, I remember talking to him when he first went to college and what was happening there. And then he pivoted to Barry and now East Carolina. And I was just texting him, a week or two ago when they were so close to making it to the College World Series. And
oh, yes.
Just first class athlete, first class parents. And those are the fun guys to follow.
Matt, you asked me about athletes, and recently saw a post on social media. There was a young man who was pictured there with his daughter, and he and his daughter had a Penn Yan sweatshirt on, and he had a Penn Yan t-shirt on. And I said to him, I texted him, I said, "You know what? I remember it wasn't that long ago that you left it all out on a lacrosse field, helping Corning East knock off Penn Yan in high school lacrosse." It was like, I don't know, maybe it was a sectional game, or it was Penn Yan's out of Section 5, so it was Section 4 versus Section 5, so it was a regional game. And he says, "You remember that?" Yeah, I was there, but it was a hot day, much like we've experienced of late, and watching these kids just go through the grind and everything like that. And let me say this, Paul, I have a lot of respect for these young men and women, because I see and get to know that many of them go to school before class begins. They have morning practice, then they spend all day in the classroom, practice or a game on that day, and then homework, and how they're able to maintain the honor or high honor rolls. It's amazing. And I take my hat off to them.
Definitely, when done correctly, life skills, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's great that people like you and RLM Sports that you give them some of the recognition. Not that that's why they're playing sports, but I think we're very lucky in our area that the recognition that the high school athletes and college athletes get for sports, versus if you were playing in some school in Chicago or New York City. I mean, you make the athletes feel special, and I think that's awesome.
A few years back, when I was working at the radio station, we had covered Corning Community College women's basketball, and they had hosted the national tournament, the National Junior College Tournament. And there was a school from Chicago, the College of DuPage, that came in. And I can remember interacting with the coaches, with a coach, and he says, "You know what? We're in the shadow of professional sports in Chicago, and we get little to no recognition. We don't get any newspaper write-ups." And I think about this area. We don't have professional teams other than, say, maybe the Rumble Ponies in Binghamton, baseball like that. So around here, all the notoriety that these athletes get. I mean, you're talking TV, you're talking newspaper. There are now some enterprises that are out there that are doing interviews and showing photos, but they're making use of social media. Mike Gill's wife, Maria, was a photographer for the Star Gazette in Elmira. And she's the one, and I tell her all the time, I said, you know, Maria, you turned me on to Facebook as far as, you know, the recognition out there and all of that. And I'm going to tell a story out of class, but anyways, I was covering a boys lacrosse game at Corning West a few years back when Maria was not married to Mike at the time. She was covering a lacrosse game, and there was a pass from my side of the field to the far end down near the goal area. Well, the pass went awry and actually hit her camera lens. And I made a comment. I said, you know, there's a newspaper photographer here and she's taking photos, and she just got hit by a lacrosse ball. And I mentioned her name. So she gets back to the office after shooting, you know, the game itself. And they said to her, "Are you all right?" And she says, "What are you talking about?" "Well, we heard you got hit by a lacrosse ball." So we've had that long running anecdote to enjoy and bounce off one another and all that. So I told her, I said, next time I see you, I'll bring you a helmet.
How ironic that her daughter's become quite the lacrosse player as well.
Oh my goodness, yeah, yeah.
It's a funny
She's
world.
going on. I guess she's going off to what? Kenesha or no? Niagara.
Yes. Yeah. It's really a special community when it comes to sports, when it comes to the stories, even the rich history that we have that does trickle into the national and professional level. That's what's amazing, you know.
Well, you know, you asked me about Matt. You asked me about athletes who stand out and everything like that. I guess I'm old enough to say that I covered the progress of Kurt Manwaring,
Sure.
his son Dylan, who played ball at Horseheads High School and went off and had a brief flirtation with professional ball. Mikey Lemoncelli, who is with the Seattle Mariners organization right now. And I said, I did an interview with him. He had Tommy John surgery. I did an interview with him and his dad, Jeff, in Mike's senior year. And I said, you know, you're probably going to be part of an all-time trivia question. What athlete was on the operating table having Tommy John surgery and got drafted by the Seattle Mariners? Mike Lemoncelli. So we've laughed about that. So, I mean, there are athletes who have played well, who have done well for themselves. And, you know, a lot of times the apple doesn't fall far from the tree as you see how their offspring have fared, like your daughters, sir.
Thanks.
Bob, what do you? I've been wanting to ask since I knew we were going to talk. What differences, if any, do you see from athletes today than athletes 30 years ago, 40, 50, 10, whatever happens to be? Do you see, or don't you see a lot? I mean, well, you know, what do you see?
Stole my question. That's a great question, Matt. That's a great question.
Well, those are
because you were going to ask it too.
There you go. I think the work effort is still there. But, you know, you've got to do the time to work at your craft. It's like anything, whether you want to be a sports management type guy running a professional organization like a hockey franchise or a baseball franchise, or if you're an educator. You can't just go into the classroom, turn the lights on and say, okay, open your books. This is what we're doing today. It takes a lot of prep work, as you both know, to be able to be there. And I don't think that there's a drop off in talent. There are more opportunities out there nowadays, I think, for the athletes to avail themselves to. I look at the schools, for example. Mike Simmons at Corning High School has done a remarkable job with the tech side of things. When I go over to call basketball games during the winter, he has a lot of his student group setting up cameras. They're still looking for announcers, so I don't know if you have any plans for doing any moonlighting, guys, or whatever the case. But he's also in charge of the yearbook at Corning High School, and they
He's
give
incredible. I just interrupt real quick. He's
Sure.
absolutely incredible. That high school is almost like a college campus when you go on for sports. I
That
mean, you know,
field house-
and amongst other things. But Mike's incredible.
I have a lot of the coaches that have come in that are non-conference opponents during basketball season, and they just marvel that they say that it's like a Division III college field house with what the Corning taxpayers have agreed to fund, and they've got some quality people in there who are running those particular segments of the school.
So opportunities, there's more. I mean, these athletes today, even at the high school level, you can almost create a brand for yourself, can't you?
Absolutely. And Matt, I think you could weigh in on this. I mean, talking about opportunities for young men and young women when you were with the Pioneers or when you were with the hockey team, you must have had a number of interns who came in and got a chance to see, maybe to cut their teeth and see, is this something that I want to do, something I want to pursue, sports management, things of that nature?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, it was always an interesting thing when you'd have interns come in, because one of the things I learned quickly was this is not a 9-to-5 world. This is it, Bob. It's exactly like your career, you know, and I loved it while I did it, but I used to call it a lifestyle job. It wasn't. It was no 9-to-5. It was. We always used to have a kind of a saying: we work when other people work, we work when other people play. And you had to love it so much that didn't bother you. That was something that it wasn't even that you took pride in. You enjoyed it, and you know, I'd put in, me along with a tremendous number of other people working together, 60, 70, 80. I remember one week when I was in baseball where I did 105 hours, 7 straight days of 15-hour days, because we had a 9-game homestand, I remember. And so those 7 of those days I put in 105 hours. But when you love it and you're dealing with sports and athletes and the excitement that surrounds that, and you know, obviously I'm preaching to the choir, of course, but you know, there is nothing quite like it. And sure, we got tired and but boy, we also had a good time, and the excitement you get and the feeling of being part of something that's bigger than you, and you know, doesn't your world isn't you, it's us, you know, and
Yes.
There was something to that, you know, only people who've been through it know it. You know, I don't have the words to, you know, to describe it the way I would like to, but and there were some interns or people would come in and they would just fall in love with it. And I still have relationships with people who are, I know I've got relationships with people who are running, like, you know, Jacksonville Arena and New Orleans state, you know, arenas and stadiums, and you know, some real high level stuff.
Right.
And it's you know, it's amazing the way some of the people went on, and other people it wasn't for them because they didn't want to live that kind of lifestyle, and that was okay too. But you know, there's something magical about sports, and it's the number of hours and the time you put in. You're not there because if you're doing it because someone's making you, it's never going to last, right?
No.
You're there because there's something else, and it's bigger, and it's just I've had a lot of great experiences in my other careers and other things like that, but there's nothing like that industry.
Well, you know, there are things that as I'm listening to you and all of that, in my career, I was very fortunate to work around some very talented people. I did stints in West Palm Beach, Florida, also in Jacksonville, Florida. In Jacksonville, I worked alongside in the early years as a news guy. I worked alongside a fellow who was working in New Orleans when President Kennedy was assassinated.
Mm.
And he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. But
Right.
there was an attorney in New Orleans. I think his name was Clay Garrison. I could be mistaken. Jim Garrison, and he had mounted an investigation into what he thought was a conspiracy in the assassination of the president. But this gentleman that I worked with, I got a chance to kind of, quote, pick his brain and learn a bit about all of that. I had the good fortune of doing a lot of stringing work for major radio networks when I was in the South, reporting on certain events and covering sporting events as well as news and all of that. And I think it laid the foundation for where I am right now, interacting with people, developing a style that is conversational, but at the same time, I don't go into an interview with athletes and put a mic in front of their face immediately and say, okay, tell me about your game tonight. What did you do? What kind of pitches were you mixing? I try to break it down a little bit and break the ice with some friendly chatter, make them feel comfortable, like we're talking here, as opposed to, coming off. I've seen too many young guys who come into the business and they don't have that type of demeanor. They probably will over a period of time, but I've had time to develop my style. And I remember back in my college days, they said, don't imitate people like Walter Cronkite or David Brinkley or Tom Brokaw. Develop your own style. There have been too many guys who have been, I call them cartoon characters that want to start in local TV, and then the next step up, they want to go to ESPN. Doesn't quite work that way,
Yes, you're right. You're right.
It's funny when you mention, starting local and going to ESPN. What I love that you've been able to enrich and add so much to this local scene. And one of our main pillars that we talk about a lot is meaning. And we can just tell through your stories and the fact you've mentioned it, you feel a lot of meaning and purpose with what you're doing.
Guys, one person that I want to point out, and I do get emotional thinking about it, but who was very instrumental, who became a friend well after me meeting him as a coach and interviewing him multiple times, was Mike DeLuizio.
Hmm.
And Coach D and his wife Jane were very special to me. And honestly, Mike was one of the first to reach out to me to console me when I lost my wife at Christmas time. And that's something that you'll carry with you forever. And it's not just Mike. I mean, there are other people who have been like that, and I count them as friends. There was a TV reporter years ago who came back and maintained a friendship with Mike Eisenberg. He was at TV 36, and I got a chance to see him after a number of years. But I can remember him reaching out to me one time. He says, Bob, I was working for ESPN as a producer at the time. And sometimes we would work with our radio brethren there. And he says, I was driving down the highway and I heard this on-the-spot report, Bob Michaels from the Corning Classic. And he goes, oh my God, I remember Bob. So we maintain that friendship, and there's so many there. Guys, we could probably go on for a couple hours.
I would imagine.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, I mean, do you, and Paul kind of mentioned it a bit, you've added a lot to this community, and you're a level of a consistency in a small community like this is probably a bit unique, I would imagine, and pretty special for I guess a lot of us. Paul and I have lived here most of our lives, and you're a mainstay here, and your voice and doing the games, and I think that's pretty cool to have. And you've been doing it 52 odd years here.
There you go again.
I don't use that as to say anything other than that's awesome. That's amazing. Do you have a timeline? Are you going to be at, I've had enough? At what point do you say I had enough, or you just keep going as long as the voice box works?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll add something to that. My oldest grandson was a lacrosse player at Horseheads. He played football, JV football, but decided lax was his game. And he said to me, you think, and this is before he got into high school, he says, do you think you'll ever be able to call my games? I said, well, I'll probably be able to, whether I do or not. You can always count on me being there to support you. Well, he's obviously gone on and graduated from high school, and his brother is same. And I have to credit my granddaughter. I call her my favorite granddaughter, but she's the only granddaughter I've got. She plays lacrosse at Horseheads High School, and during the winter, Paul, she's a cheerleader. So, you know, I get a chance to see her in the winter as well as in spring and during family holidays as well. So I'm a lucky guy.
You are.
You are very lucky. I want to ask you one more question. What advice would you give to anybody in high school or fishing around in college to what they think they want to do for the rest of their life? Like you said you made the switch in college. Like, what advice would you give any person at any age, really, somebody that's thinking, what should I do with myself? I guess it doesn't have to be 18. It could be somebody pivoting careers.
I would say try to experience as much as you can. You know, from a guy who was a carpenter's laborer helper, who helped pound nails and put up siding and all of that during the off education years. But I think I had that passion to want to get into radio, you know, from a young age. But somebody perhaps wiser than me said, you know, for every door that shuts in your face, another one opens up, and it may not be immediate. I had an experience working for a radio station down south that they decided that they were going to bring the owner's son who had graduated from college, didn't have a job. So I was the low man on the totem pole, and that was okay. I got out of radio for a year, sold automobiles. Ultimately, illness with my father-in-law brought us back to this area. Had no intention of getting back into radio whatsoever. Got a call from an associate that I had worked with previously, and he had left and gone off to Buffalo, came back, and he says, you know what, we've had a change of ownership at this radio station. We're looking for somebody part-time to do news, but it started out as a sports gig. The new ownership decided that instead of just doing home games, they would do road games as well. So my first play-by-play venture with that station was a road trip to Hornell on a winter's night. Back in the day, we used phone lines to do play-by-play. We had an engineer who always called the phone company to make sure that the phone block, remember where you had the little module that you plugged in your phone cord? Well, we always had him take care of that. And so that night we go to Hornell. They knew we're coming. We're looking for the phone block, which in normal circumstances they would put behind the scores table against the back wall. My play-by-play host, I said, you get the lineups, get them into the scorebook. I'll go look for the line and the plug-in. It was at one end, at the far end of the gym. I ended up plugging in with one cable, but it wasn't long enough. It was like 10 feet short. In my box of cables and all of that, I found an extra one. I had nothing to pare down the wires, so I used my teeth, you know, so my eye teeth saw what I was saying. Tied them all together, plugged them into the mixer board. 15 seconds later, the opening tip. So, I mean, I've got probably 101 anecdotes, maybe more than that, that I would share. I always tell my kids I'm going to write a book. Yeah, well, I should get started now.
You definitely should. Well, couple things. We thank you for coming on. I mean, you are a legend in the community, and it's really special the coverage that, like I said earlier, our high school athletes and local college athletes get. And I mean, I know you're going to keep doing it. I know you wouldn't commit to anything when we asked you that question, but I know you're going to keep doing it.
Only if you two, when you're out in the crowd or out in the spectator or the gallery or whatever, you come up and you say hello. Because I always tell my other coaches when they're not working, I always carry an extra set of headphones. So I'll be more than happy to slap them on you and get you to talk for 5, 10, 20 minutes, something like that at a time.
That's a deal.
Fun. Deal.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, thanks so much for coming on.
Certainly been my pleasure, fellas. And Matt, good to see you again.
Likewise, Bob. I know. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully I'll see you sooner than it's been several years. I don't even know how many, but more than a few. But great seeing you also, and hopefully I'll see you soon. And believe me, I'll definitely come say hello.
And guys, thanks for the invite. It's certainly been my pleasure.
You got it. Absolutely.